event, Sheroes, the Life and Legacy of Hazel I. Jackson. We are pleased to be broadcast today by TCP. Thank you very much for that. NAACP Lancaster shares the vision of the national NAACP organization to ensure a society in which all individuals have equal rights without discrimination based on race. The NAACP focuses its strategy on the 21st century on 6 game changers: economic stability, free, high quality public education for all, health equality, including high quality health care, equitable dispensation of justice, protecting voting rights and fair representation for all, and expanding youth and youth adult engagement. If you'd like more information about any of these game changers, please see our website, www.naacplancasterpa.org. Lancaster NAACP will also join Franklin and Marshall College and Phillips Museum of the Arts to present an evening with father and son artists Jerome W. Jones Jr. and Jeremiah Jones in honor of Black History Month. The father and son duo will discuss their journey of creating the IM 400, the African Journey in America, 1619 to 2019. It's a banner, a collection of paintings depicting Africans before being brought to the shores of America, the 400-year journey of African Americans, and solutions for a better future. We invite you to join the virtual event on February 23rd at 7 p.m. Today's event will be moderated by Mrs. Kim Gantz. Mrs. Gantz is a veteran classroom teacher with over 30 years experience in early childhood and elementary education. She has worked in diverse classrooms in rural, suburban, and urban settings. She is currently an independent academic coach and education consultant with a passion for teaching and learning local history. Our guest for today's show is Ms. Amber Holland. Amber Holland is a Lancaster, PA native, a J.P. McCaskey graduate, and the granddaughter of Professor Hazel I. Jackson. She started her political career canvassing and working the polls on Election Day in Lancaster. And over the past decade, she has embarked on a political career as an organizer and strategist on the local, state, and federal levels, helping to win elections and push policy like healthcare, climate change, and immigration reform. Currently, she is working with educators as an organizer, helping to fight for a quality education in every zip code. Hazel I. Jackson's long and distinguished career as an educator in Lancaster County stretched over 3 decades. She made history in Lancaster as the first African-American woman to hold a teaching position in the School District of Lancaster. She was also the first Black professor at Millersville University, retiring as both assistant professor of English and African-American studies. Hazel Jackson was an active member of the NAACP Lancaster Branch, the Lancaster City Planning Commission, and Bethel A.M.E. Church. She sang in a choir and enjoyed the dramatic arts, both writing plays herself and working with the Theater of the Seventh Sister. For her trailblazing work as an educator and as a civil rights advocate, Mrs. Hazel I. Jackson's name has been brought before the committee reviewing the renaming of the former Edward Hand Middle School in the School District of Lancaster. Before I hand the program over to Kim, I'd like to just let participants know that this is a town hall forum. Therefore, as we're listening to the moderator and the guest speaking, you can, in the chat, ask questions, and I will see them, and I will make sure to ask them to Ms. Holland as she and Kim have a conversation back and forth on this really engaging and exciting topic. So thank you again, and Kim, I will hand this over to you.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to honor Mrs. Hazel Jackson. Hello, Amber. I'm excited to meet you. I'd like to take a few minutes to share my connections with your grandmother. The first opportunity that I had to be with her was in the early 90s. I was a student of your grandmother's at Millersville University in African American Studies. I remember when she walked in the room, she was just so regal and confident. And I knew then that I wanted to continue in education. Several years later, I married my high school sweetheart, whose grandmother, Mrs. Mary Janelle Butler Travis, happened to be very good friends with your grandmother, and she was an avid Scrabble player. So I got to sit in and watch them play, and they were very competitive. So that was fun to see. Another cherished memory that I have of your grandmother is when my mom worked with her at HAC. she invited my mom, my sister, and I to an event at Millersville where we got to meet Miss Alice Walker. And so my sister and I got to sit thigh to thigh with Miss Walker, and we were young and impressionable. And I just remember her giving us some very encouraging words about pursuing our dreams as young Black women, and continuing to just push forward and go on, and we did. So your grandmother was an extraordinary woman. I'm very proud to have known her both professionally and personally, and I consider her a great hero and influencer in my life. So I do have a few questions for you today. The first one being, what impact has your grandmother had on your life in particular? I think I'll just go through the questions, and then as we go on, we can kind of pull them together. What do you see as her legacy? And we know that she grew up in a time of segregation, and she was one of the first African American women to teach here in Lancaster in the 1960s, and then she went on to be a professor at Millersville. But I was just curious to know what impact segregation had on her, coming from Seneca, South Carolina, um, to up north, and what some of the differences were in that. So if you could
Sure.
share a little bit of that with us.
Sure. Well, thank you all very much for having me today and giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of my grandmother, who was a trailblazer and a shero. So thank you, Joanna, and thank you, Kim, very much, and for sharing how she has personally impacted your life and how she's impacted my life, I would say, as giving me perseverance, being a fighter, a trailblazer and a trendsetter and a woman of faith. Growing up to have somebody had those qualities that were easily transcendable to me, to the community, was something that impacted me. And so it allowed me to look directly up to my role model. You know, a lot of times they ask you, who's your role model? Who do you look up to? And I could really say with so much honesty and light and love and joy about my life that it was my grandmother. For so many reasons, when, you know, if we went to church together on Sundays, or I was doing a lot of theater work with her, or helping me shape who I am in public speaking. So she has definitely within my life shaped me and as who I am. And even just moving forward on now as an organizer and somebody fighting for education, I would have never thought how it would have came full circle to see how getting out there on the election day on the polls and helping to shape policy and life now circles back to seeing how the fight is here on education, and how important she has been in that journey to watch somebody who has been an educator, who fought for education and had that ability to be able to teach, who never stopped teaching. Because it's funny you mentioned her at Hack, because Hack was actually after she had retired and she wanted to go back into the classroom again. And teach some more. So she was always somebody who was constantly being a student as well as being a teacher and an educator. So to have that individual in my life is somebody who's definitely helped to shape me. And her style, she definitely, as they always say, the Hazel Jackson tip. And it was just always a gratitude to be able to see her and to see her put her stuff together and to walk out there with so much pride about herself. She stated that her clothes are how she showed her reverence to the Lord, when she always wanted to make sure she was on point and sharp. And so it was something that that instilled in me too, to know that you always have to put your best foot forward and always look your best to continue to let the world know who you are and to hear your voice and what you have to bring. So now I think it asked me a second question. Was there another question in there too? Did you want me to go into that? I'm happy to do that, and to the legacy of her life a little bit, or tell a little bit more about her life.
I would like to hear a little bit about her legacy, and what I know that there is discussion about having a school named after, you know, her. So I'm just curious as to what you see as her legacy moving forward.
Well, I think her legacy, I'll just give some adjective: pride, joy, a lover of life, avid Scrabble player, a person of faith, someone constantly seeking knowledge, and I'd say perseverance, and a fighter. Just knowing, kind of tying in what you said about coming from segregation. She was a teacher, you know, for from 1984 to 52, that she actually taught in the segregated school system in the South. And with that being said, being in the segregated South, they had doctors and lawyers and educators and teachers of their own color. So they were able to look up to somebody who was African American, you know, separate but equal. So on their side of town, it was important that you saw people of influence who were people of color. So when she came up north, she thought that it was going to be a better opportunity for her. But what she ended up finding out was, coming up north, actually, the separate but equal segregation was much greater than, because now we are in another society that now we're integrated, but she wasn't getting the same opportunities and experiences that she had in the segregated South. And knowing that, she ended up coming here and working for 9 years at RCA, at the old RCA factory plant, trying to get back into education. And she would call on a daily basis, see opportunities that they had for English teachers there at the time. And they would go through her recommendations and her credentials, and they said, sounds great, send us all your information. But back then you had to send in your picture. And as soon as she sent in her picture, then of course, now the position has been filled. We don't need your services anymore. So she went through that for 9 years. And, you know, sometimes we think about, what is our goal? What is our purpose in life? And people search for years trying to figure it out. But she knew from the very beginning what her purpose was, you know, but she had to keep fighting to get back to it, to make her mark, to allow her words and her life to be, and her light to be shown. And with her being able to do that for 9 years, you know, she wasn't good at factory work, and she always talked about, I couldn't do it. Her hands weren't, it wasn't where her mind was at. And finally, after 9 years, she then decided she was just going to start camping out in the superintendent's office. Every Friday, she would go in, sit down, and just wait until one day a teacher went on sabbatical, and it was her opportunity. They said, listen, you've been here for a very long time, for months, just staking out, waiting out your turn. And it's been granted. And so she had the opportunity to then teach at Edward Hand Middle School in 1961 as the first African-American female in the School District of Lancaster. And that's why I say a trailblazer, because she was able to open the doors and the pathway of so many other educators of color to come behind her and to leave their marks, you know. And so as we talk about the school, it's great. I just want to uplift and thank the School District of Lancaster for taking this opportunity to rename 5 different schools when they saw that there was a moment in time right now that it's civil unrest within our community, and they answered the call. And so I appreciate the school district for answering the call to putting 5 different schools up, that they say that our students that are in the 7th Ward need to walk around in school buildings and hallways that reflect people who have walked this walk, lived them, given them the best, and want the best for their education to help propel them in life. So I say all that to say the segregation piece of that, to bring it back full circle, has definitely impacted us as we move forward as a trailblazer, and helped to propel her and instill that into me as well. And so after the 9 years of finally being able to be able to teach, she taught at Edward Hand Junior High for a long time. But not only did she teach, she always knew it was important to make sure her students knew about African-American history. I was actually kind of blown away when I ended up finding out when I was older that what I looked up to was waited to go to McCaskey and go to the Black History Club. She actually started that at Edward Hand Junior High School years ago, which now has propelled into McCaskey's Black History Club that's been around for years. She worked with McCaskey students and Conestoga Valley students when she wrote the Richard Allen story for Bethel A.M.E. and brought schools together, both of those schools together for the first time to put on a production because they needed enough white kids to help do what they needed to do on the Methodist Episcopal side when they were putting together the story. So her goal was always to make sure that African American history was being told and that students knew where they came from. And if we can even go on further and talk about Millersville University, to then actually be the first African American faculty member and professor there at Millersville was another trailblazing, trend-setting moment in her life. And actually there too as well, she helped to put together the African American literature curriculum. So I mean, her whole purpose was really to make sure she uplifted the African American community and make sure that their stories of those individual trailblazers were told as well. So that was truly a passion of hers.
That's an amazing legacy. I mean, you would say something and then I thought, oh wow, and then you just keep adding to it and keep adding to it, and it's phenomenal. It's really phenomenal. We have a question from our viewers. This is from Chuck, and Chuck, it says, "Hey Amber, your grandmother was amazing. So sad she is not well known by the white community." 2 questions. 1, did she struggle with staying positive when she was so discriminated against? And 2, if she was able to stay positive in any degree, what was her secret?
Well, I will actually say, Chuck, that she was known in the white community too as well. Definitely, like I said, she spoke. Now, her passion, of course, was to make sure that she educated her students, and she was really well educated in her family on African American history, but she was engaged in Church Women United that actually transcended across all faiths and people, not really people of color. Like it was really just her and in that arena with Church Women United, where she was able to be there. But then you also, I would say that working with Theater the Seventh Sister and several different areas in Lancaster, actually, she was the first African-American on the city's planning committee, as well as she helped lead the charge to rename Higbee Elementary School to Martin Luther King School. So I say that to say, you have to be able to know how to, in a world where segregation was very prevalent at that time, you had to be an individual who knew who you were and be able to make sure that you were able to, I don't want to say fit in, but I guess be comfortable with yourself and be comfortable with what you brought to the table. And so I say that to say she has done plenty of things that have crossed over from African-American culture to, I believe, just into everyday culture. But what I also want to say is African-American culture and everyday American culture should be intertwined every single day, because we all have helped to make a difference and shape here who we are in Lancaster and in America.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Chuck. And I really, I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Kim, before I just sort of move on here. But you were talking about stereotypes, and thinking about how the segregation in the South, how there were actually less opportunity as she came up north, and that was during her initial time. I'm curious though, as time went on, how did her opinion of the way that segregation looked in schools? Because obviously it looks, it doesn't look the same as it did in like 1965, but there are still so many disparities between the way that education happens for white students versus students of color. So I'm just curious if you have any insight into what your grandmother, as she progressed, closer to this time, what were some of the things she noticed as far as changes that were positive, things that were still really an issue that she still felt like she was still fighting for, way back from sitting in the superintendent's office?
Well, I would say today, just making sure that the African-American history is told. I mean, I could, like I said earlier, I do a lot of organizing on education. And as we look at today, there's so many states that are actually trying to take African-American education out of their curriculum. And so I think we are still sitting in the time right now that, yes, we have moved forward and we are integrated, and but there's still so many untalked about conversations that that are well to be talked about to help make a difference and shape our community still. So you asked what has really changed. I would say what has changed is that we are all going to school, and they say every zip code and every every education in every zip code. But as we just talked about, NAACP's monitor is basically still need free public education in every zip code to be the same. When you look at the funding formula and you look at what resources are in different schools, zip codes and zoning codes, you definitely see there's still a great disparity. So it definitely takes that time to make policy and education will help to make a difference here in the future is my thought, just being an organizer. So I look at it just a little bit differently too, because I work in that fight all the time.
Right. Thank you. We have another question for you. Kim, did you want to add anything before I moved on? I don't want to cut you off.
No, it's okay. I was just going, I see the question, what were Dr. Jackson's contributions to Bethel A.M.E. Church? And my husband's family was also members of that church. So I'm curious to see what your response is to that.
Oh, definitely. She was on the steward board. She sang in the choir. She helped with the senior choir. She was a lay woman. She wrote a lot of the plays. She wrote the resolutions. It was actually when she had passed, I remember them saying like, oh my gosh, who's going to write the resolution now? Because she was the one who always did all the writing and did the resolution. So she stayed very active in Bethel A.M.E.'s church as a true woman of faith. She actually was a past Sunday school superintendent for Bethel A.M.E. So she stayed engaged for a very, very long time. And I would just say growing up that she made sure I stayed engaged with Bethel A.M.E., going to Sunday school, singing on the choir. And in her essay competitions, again, I always go back to, she definitely wanted to make sure African-American history was told. And she made sure every year that there was this African-American essay writing contest, and that, the children participated that were at the church. And it was always a great opportunity to learn a little bit more about your African-American history. So she definitely stayed engaged with Bethel and loved her church and was a true woman of faith.
And going back to Chuck's question, do you think that was maybe part of one of the things that really kept her positive at a time when it might have been really hard to stay positive, was her faith?
You are absolutely correct. Yes, truly being a woman of faith, being somebody who knew what her purpose was, and staying prayerful and diligent. She was definitely somebody that she was a pay it forward person and always was a giver. And I also think that was something that helped to keep her grounded. Her favorite comment was to always say she would do things for people, and if you did it from, you never really talked about it. You just did it because you did it out of the kindness and the goodness of your heart. And I definitely believe that and know that, and that's what she walked and lived by. So going back to Chuck's question, those things kept her grounded. Yes, and then being at hand. And being at Millersville, what she also knew was that she needed, her white colleagues to help propel her, that saw something in her that said, hey, we want to bring you to Millersville, or hey, we want to continue. We worked here with you, and these are the things that we want to instill in you, or how they kind of clung to each other during that time.
We have a question from Robert Martin, wondering if you could share anything about Professor Jackson's husband, your grandfather.
Yes. My grandfather, Grady Jackson, he passed away, oh my goodness, probably maybe 10 years before my grandmother passed away. I was in junior high still then at that time. And so He was from Lancaster, and so actually she was coming up north to, well, actually, excuse me, he was from South Carolina too, but he had already been in Lancaster for a while. So she was coming up north to be with him when they had gotten married. So, but he's actually passed away. But what I found out about him when he passed away, when he was also a fighter, they worked at RCA too, and he actually retired early because of the mistreatment of African Americans on the assembly line. So he took the early retirement and said, you know what, I'll make room for the younger people coming in to make sure that they have a better way of life versus me. And I was actually just kind of blown away that he took that stance and fight too, as I found that out a little bit more about him getting older.
It makes me just think a little bit about, how our vice president right now, right? Kamala Harris, and how we have a first gentleman. Is that what he is?
Yeah, he's going to first gentleman, yes.
It kind of makes me think like, your grandfather was maybe like the first gentleman, right? He was there and he was a support, but he took a little bit of a backseat to all the things that your grandmother was kind of, doing at that
Yes, she stayed very active in the community. Very active. She was always at a meeting, busy doing something, and she was always out and about in the city of Lancaster, styling and profiling, as they would say in the Hazel Jackson tip.
Oh, that's great. That's really great.
I did have a question, kind of in light of what we've been going through in the past year with the pandemic, and then politically. I was just wondering what you think your grandmother would think about how things are going now. Do you think that she would be very much like a part of maybe Black Lives Matter? And if you could just maybe expand a little bit on.
Yeah, I definitely think that she would be engaged on some level to help make sure that that the message is out there, whatever level she could help to do that. And I say that she talked, to her passion a lot was through, like I said, through the church, through African American literature. So if it was telling a story, because actually now you look at so many stories like Ma Rainey's Black Bottoms out on Netflix right now, and all these different things that were played. It was Wine in the Wilderness by Alice Childress, or August Wilson's work. And I say that to say that we're watching so many of our African American literature play out now and be uplifted. So I think she would definitely be engaged on making sure that our theater aspect the story is being told. She did some original work on the Christiana riots, and we did some theaters and some long monologues what took place in Pennsylvania. And so she was always in the fight. So I would never not believe that why she wouldn't be in the fight now and fighting in the way she knew how to fight best. And I would be remiss if I didn't quote former Councilman Nelson Polite by saying, we might have fought in the streets, but she constantly fought in the classroom. So if there was a way to continue to fight in education to make sure her voice would be heard, she definitely would be on the front lines fighting.
You just kind of sparked a memory for me. So when I was at Millersville in my early 20s, I guess I should maybe say, so I grew up in Christiana, Pennsylvania. And I didn't know about the Christiana riot until I was around my 20s. And I'm thinking now that it came from the class I was in with your grandmother. So I lived right on top of the hill, a member of the church that was a part of it. And I'm just amazed by the fact that I didn't know anything about the Christiana riot. And then you just mentioning it right now helped me to make that connection and to see that memory that, and that is something that needs to be known. Mm-hmm. So how old were you when you learned about the riot that happened there?
Yeah, in high school. Mm-hmm. Yeah. She did some original work there and wrote like some choreographed monologue plays. And so I was one of the women in the play that were telling the story, and then actually went on and did a little bit more work on that via her at Theater of the Seventh Sister with the African Grove Project. So I worked along with her to tell that story a few different times with the Christiana riots and how they escaped to freedom going through Canada. So it was eye-opening for me just to even know that, there's so many things that have transpired in these last, I think in this last year that has been enlightening to individuals. Not that we didn't know what would happen or took place, but now it's like you want to know the knowledge. I find myself wanting to know the knowledge, so it helps you to know what you're projecting in your knowledge moving forward in life and just in your history and who you are, and knowing as much as we can where we have came from as African Americans here in America.
Yeah, and I think your recollection there, Kim, it sparked another recollection for one of our viewers. Says, hello, NAACP chapter 2302. This is from Richard Allen. Amber, I knew your beautiful and highly intelligent grandmother, Dr. and Mrs. Hazel Jackson, and know your mom, Cheryl. Mrs. Jackson was a great educator, leader, and staunch supporter of our civil rights cause. I participated in the Black History Month essay contest at Bethel A.M.E. Church. Dr. Jackson helped many people, including myself. I hope that the Lancaster City School Board names an appropriate school after your grandmother. So it is just clear as we continually hear these stories, just how far the reach is of the impact and the influence and the love of your grandmother. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Her love was one of those, I guess, loves that was timeless and transcendent, and it just sometimes even when you saw the picture the other day of just her sitting, on the paper when we were taking place, it was going to be happening, and just brought back so many memories for myself and for my family, and just who she was and what she did in the community, and what impactful change she had. Just even knowing, honestly, that Higbee School was changed from MLK and she helped to lead that fight was one that blew my mind. I was like, oh my gosh. And, just to even know the things that she did left a lasting legacy in Lancaster. And actually, Kim, when you spoke about going to see, I think you said Alice Childress, I believe it was, at Millersville University.
Alice Walker.
Alice Walker, sorry, Alice is the playwright. Alice Walker. It was because when she retired as that first African American professor there at Millersville, they gave her a lecture and a scholarship in her name. So still to this day, there's a student that receives a scholarship at Millersville University in the arts and humanities field, and that lecture series still takes place to this day, where they've had August Wilson and Ossie Davis and Alice Walker and Iana Van Zant. The list goes on and on of individuals that have came to speak at her lecture, just of great African American literature and stories to be told. So definitely. So it was great to know that you had the opportunity to participate with her at those lectures. I always enjoyed going to those with her.
I just wanted to point out one of the panelists, one of the people said that the Christiana riot is not a riot. And I did want to say that they call it a resistance, the Christiana resistance, or a revolt. So just to say that. One of the questions from Marianne Coleman, where did she go to college and graduate school, and what was her major?
She went to South Carolina State University. That's where she graduated, and her major was English. And I actually wanted to say that the spark of becoming an educator actually came from her teacher. And I think as we're here for the education panelists, it's important to say that teachers instill so much in our youth and help to propel them for the future. And her teacher one day said to her, which she had no idea where she was going in her direction in life at this time at a younger age, to another student in class, why don't you just be good like Hazel? She's going to make something of herself. And she always told that story was the spark in her mind that said, wow, she thinks I can do something with myself. I can make something of myself, that made her have that fight within her to continue to move forward. So she definitely, that's where she went to school, and education was her passion. and Educator is what sparked her interest to pursue that career field. Which I also would add that I think is real prominent, that she taught English in the segregated school. So when she came up north, she wanted to continue what she had been doing there. So, and didn't have that opportunity for a while.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So we have another question from Chuck. Wondering if your grandmother wrote any books or articles about her struggle for equality that could be shared. So I'm not sure if she had published works and what those might be.
Well, it's funny you should say that. No, she didn't. I mean, it's funny things. I always used to get on like, Grandma, you should probably write something. And she just always stayed constantly busy doing other things. If it was still writing her own works or writing theater or plays that were performed, but no published works. But what she did start doing in her later years in life for a little bit, she actually went back to start doing that process. And it weren't published, but I have a lot of her short stories of what she had started working on, telling her story of being left-handed and growing up being left-handed, especially back then, that they looked at left-handed as like some type of handicapped. And like, so she would, like her siblings would tell her, you'll be taking all day, you know, just whatever you got to do for the house chores, we'll do it. You just go read it. So that's where she found her love of reading, because she would take her books and then just go somewhere and sit down and read, why her siblings would tell her that she couldn't get the work done. So, but she started writing a book on that. She started, writing little short stories on that, telling stories of when she was babysitting and what her sisters and her family sacrificed so that she could go to school and help put her through school. So so no published works, but I do have some short stories that she was actually kind of going in that direction. And unfortunately, she got ill and she passed before she was able to kind of finish that work. But I feel blessed to be able to actually have all of that, because I was trying to gather some information on her several years ago now. And she had that work and she gave it to me. So actually, as we've been embarking on this journey and hearing more about the school and speaking to her, I've been reading through a lot of that work and just bringing up a lot of memories of what she went through as a young child, and what her fight was moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, it may not be on your radar, but, you know, as far as local history is concerned, you know, gathering those things and posthumously putting those out there, you know, all of Emily Dickinson's work didn't come out until she was already had passed, but she had them all bound up in little neat packages and ready to go. But it would be, you know, that might be something to maybe consider, this idea of being able to get those short stories out. It's another way to continue her legacy. I would personally love to read them. I think that sounds amazing.
Well, actually talking about that, and it kind of answers Chuck's question a little bit too. At that time, I was trying to do a little bit of history on her, and I took some time. I went back to Millersville and I interviewed several people that taught her, and I actually interviewed her office mate that helped get the African-American curriculum going. And the thing that he said to me was that I needed her as much as she needed me. I knew that I knew the importance of telling the story of the African-American literature, but I knew that I couldn't do this without her. And so it was important that they band together to make sure that that they were able to format that curriculum together. So yes, it kind of goes back to what Chuck had asked. So yes, there was no published works, but within the white culture, yes, they knew that, you know, to make things happen, they needed to have a great relationship together.
Thank you so much. Kim, there's a message, I think, from Darlene. Did you want to go ahead and grab that? Thank you.
Hello, Darlene. So as president of the Christiana Historical Society, I worked with your grandmother when she participated in the 150th anniversary of the resistance. She was certainly a lady of grace. I can see she passed that down through your mother, Cheryl, whom I worked with on several programs during her tenure at Crispus Attucks, and I see it through you as well. Glad this program is being done in her honor. Well deserved.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'll even just say that, she did pass it on to my mom, which in transcend passed it on to myself to continue fighting for African American culture. Just even my mother being at Crispus Attucks and knowing what Crispus Attucks brought to America, and what the Crispus Attucks Community Center is. So definitely, definitely one of continuing fighting for African American history in our works, in our life, in day-to-day life.
And I think we all know that that's a struggle that is continuing in education at this very, very moment.
Yes.
And making sure that, Black history is American history. It's our history. And making sure that that students are hearing the full and the whole, and sometimes the ugly truth, to be able to confront some of the issues that are happening today, the issues that your grandmother was standing up for. And I think though too, and I'm wondering just as far as how she taught, so many times in schools, particularly in like middle schools and elementary schools, they'll only focus on the pain in Black history. They'll only focus on, the ideas of slavery, or, they'll look at Jim Crow. And I am not from Lancaster County. I am from Berks County. And so I did not go to Millersville University, but I would have probably loved to have sat in one of her classes. I'm just wondering that, what we need to bring forward more is this Black excellence to the front of the classroom, and showing these examples. And I'm just wondering if there were any particular people in history that she loved to shine a spotlight on. Somebody that was just really inspiring to her, that she, tried to make sure that her students in some way or another was able to experience that. That's my question.
Well, I would say in her works, a theater, her curriculum theater, I would say probably one that I would say speak to me personally that I got through her was Ida B. Wells. Was somebody definitely who was an educator and somebody who was actively in her political life, was one. I would say Alice Childress, who is the author, because we definitely did a lot of her work and her theater work with Raisin in the Sun. August Wilson would be another individual with, like we said, Maul Rainey's Black Bottom, that's just now been redone again, reproduction. So I would say it was a lot of notable, probably literature people that did a lot, that definitely helped to shape who she was in her life.
Thank you. And I just want to encourage everyone as we continue on. I just want to encourage the viewers to please go ahead and throw out questions in the chat. Either Kim or I will be able to catch it and share it with Amber as we continue and start to close up our talk today. So Amber, is there any special, I'm just thinking maybe, is there any special memory that you have with your grandmother, something that was maybe a particular incident that was where she inspired you, like something that was like just personal? I don't want you to get too personal, so if I'm digging too deep, I apologize, but maybe just something that, when you think back, you're like, this moment with my grandmother was an impacting, meaningful moment for me in obviously in your life, moving into the political activism that you have now.
There's so many, honestly. I could think of funny things. I could think of things that like made me go, wow, she did that. So I'll start with first. I'll go with Kim when she said she was an avid Scrabble player. There were so many times that I played Scrabble with her. Yes, and they were both very competitive. And I will say there was one time I beat her, and I will never forget that time. So that was one good memory. But I think one that really truly sticks out was one day there's a few. Growing up, I always used to go, she would take me to school. And so every day during the morning time, our weekly school, I would learn a new spelling word. And so we would work on compound words on our way to school. And one always was automobile, just always like was the compound word, and we would go through it. And I, just those kind of things, thinking about that with her, what she always had instilled in me. But then getting older in life and not actually knowing the sacrifices that she had made in the school district. I just knew she, taught in Millersville and she was a professor until one day she picked me up from school and said I had to go speak somewhere and, just come with me for a little bit and then we'll head on home. And she actually was going to speak to tell her story. And I had never heard that before. And so that was one that really at Millersville, actually, her and Mr. Reed. And so it really took me back to be like, wow, my grandmother did all of that. And I had no idea, and I mean, growing up, you always hear either I had her at school or I had her at Millersville or she was my Sunday school teacher, but I didn't know the significance of who and what she had did to that help the format with the education system of breaking true barriers in Lancaster City schools. So when I sat there that day and I took all that in, it helped me to know more of who she was and why she carried herself the way that she did. And I guess I learned that in high school. And so it helped me to know who I am a little bit more. And so I appreciated that moment with her, and just to be actually somebody sitting back as a fly on the wall, because I just happened to go with her that day. I didn't even know what was really kind of going on. And so it took me back to walk away with pride and joy to know that, wow, this is my grandmother. And when they really started saying, who do you look up to? I really look up to her. Like, she really did a lot of significant things that shaped a lot of people's lives. And, and just knowing how important it is to be an educator, you instill a spark into a young child's life or somebody older and, in higher ed, that's really going to help to drive them in their future endeavors in life. And she definitely lived and walked by that. So to watch what she did for me, being young, you're like, I don't want to write another essay, grandmother. But now, you think about all the essay writing that you did, but I'm grateful to it. And I'm grateful for, making sure that I wrote every thank you note to people, that if there was a birthday party and you had to sit down and write your thank you notes and make sure all those things got done. And it was funny, my mom had sent a thank you note the other day and we talked about it. I was like, oh, I appreciate you sending me that thank you note in the mail. Just thanked her for Christmas gifts on her birthday. And we had a whole full-fledged conversation about my grandmother being somebody who wrote her handwritten notes all the time. And when she passed away, to know that she left a thank you note to everyone, still going back to take that time and to write, just then really reaffirmed to me who she was and what she had instilled in me in my life, and to what I need to take forward, moving forward as an adult, and what do I need to pay forward in life and be grateful for.
We have a comment from Michelle Fogel. I think that we missed it. Sorry if I didn't pronounce the last name correctly, but Amber, I have missed you and Miss Hazel so very much. Her namesake, my now 19-year-old son, Jackson, is currently an English major at MU, believe it or not. I owe so much to Miss Hazel, who started my journey as an educator, not to mention she boldly put me in my very first play. I went on to work endlessly with African Grove Project. I am curious if you've continued with Neighborhood Bridges at all. My deepest gratitude to you and your mom. Thank you sincerely for doing this beautiful legacy. Your grandmother was the most important mentor in my life, and I think of her whenever I say Jackson's name out loud. Proud to see you carrying on her positive force in the world. Keep telling stories.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Michelle. Oh, man, it was so great to hear from you. It's actually funny to bring up Neighborhood Bridges, which, again, like, I really have to say my grandmother love of theater and life and educating really helped to shape who I am. Just Michelle even telling that story about her son, and Neighborhood Bridges, which was a program that Michelle had brought, and I was so grateful to work with her to do that, where we intertwined working with students, and we did some students with the city schools where we put together. So to answer your question, no, I have not continued with Neighborhood Bridges at the moment, but actually I was really thinking about that the other day on some future work. But there was a theater program where they had some cognitive learning lessons and writing and storytelling, and then we would put the work together and act it out. And it was a great experience to really watch students and had that opportunity with Michelle to watch our students get engaged, get involved. Students that were quiet at the beginning of the process really like dive into their creative writing and then be excited to share their stories. And really, honestly, I really have always had a passion of working with the youth, and I'm sure it probably fell from off working with her and doing a lot of things in the youth, with the youth. And so I'm just grateful to have that opportunity to work with. So thank you, Michelle. Wow, I can't believe Jackson is 19 years old and he's an English major at Millersville. So thank you very, very much for sharing that. I appreciate that. And like she said, work with people of all races and backgrounds and made sure that theater was, that was something she loved and was able to share it with everyone else that she loved too.
Kim, did you want to continue with, I know that Michelle had added some more. I don't know if you want to continue with that because it's another great anecdote. And I believe there's a question for the end.
I'll continue from Michelle. Ms. Hazel was adamant that I play a young Black woman in that first play I was in by Pearl Clage, who also spoke at her lecture series and allowed me to voice Ain't I a Woman by Sojourner Truth. I went through some struggles doing so as a white woman who has been keenly aware of white privilege. No matter where our events or who was in the audience, she was insistent that race as a social construct was not to be imposition. And as a woman, I was told to embody that voice. That shaped much of who I am today, but I am curious where that part of her came from. What in her motivated that insistence that race was not to keep me from maintaining my passion for the voices she laid before me? Did that change over time? Thanks, Michelle.
No, I don't think it changed over time at all. I think growing up, kind of going back to the beginning of her story, growing up in the segregated South and seeing influential people of color, was able to know what it was to look up to people that had, influence and power, Black doctors and Black lawyers and Black educators, that when she came up north, it was the ability to make sure that everybody's story was told to its best ability. And I would say, 'cause I do remember that during that play with Pearl Cleage and Michelle. And so I would just say that probably she knew that you had the voice and the ability to make sure that that story was still being told and told to its best ability. Even if you weren't a woman of color, you knew, as you're speaking right now, you knew the importance of making sure that voice came out. And so I think her having the fight to know what it took to be able to speak about race and racism during the 60s, to know that you were sometimes the only one in the room and you had to voice your opinion. And to be able to do that also started to instill a true sense of strength and pride in an individual. I would say that that sometimes you might not know you had, and you had that fight and that you weren't going to give up. So I think it gave her the ability to say, it's going to transcend across times, across race, and make sure that whatever she was engaged in, she was making sure that that voice was always still going to be in the room. A woman of color, or just a woman in general, because women has had suffrage too, even if you weren't a woman of color, So I think that definitely she's always been a fighter and somebody that's continued to keep up the fight.
That's wonderful. Thank you. That was a great question. We have another one from Adrena Carter, I believe. She says, my comment about Mrs. Hazel. Growing up on Claremont Ave, every time Ms. Hazel saw me, she took the time to ask me about school and always told me to excel, to be the best that I can be, or she would give me some advice. I never knew until I was in high school how influential she was. And I'm glad that I had the opportunity to know her without really knowing who she was. And I love that too. I love this idea that, just making those small little changes, but doing those small little things, just like that teacher did for her, just like that teacher did for her, she's affecting change in people's lives, and she's giving them things that they maybe needed, that thing that they needed to go. And again, not even knowing yet, she didn't know yet all that your grandmother was. So that's Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Drina. And I was just gonna like add to say, kind of like what she's saying. I didn't even know, you know, it was like I didn't know myself as her own granddaughter until I got older. And I really think it goes back to the spirit that she really, really carried of doing things for herself and others just to pay it forward. And she just did it, you know, and she did it with a quiet storm spirit. And she always made sure that education was the top and foremost of what you needed to take care of, and would ask people about that. But yeah, I didn't know either until I got older, and so it just really helped to make me sit back and think too, as well as who she was and what she brought to this area, and really to herself and to her family and friends around her. Um, Even to her students, you know, I would be remiss to not to say that too as well, because the students that she had at Millersville and the ones that she had in, you know, in Sunday school, there's just nowhere you could really go and then I love that about Lancaster, that if you didn't have her at Millersville, or you didn't have her kind of throughout the 60s at hand, you had her at Sunday school in Millersville, and she just always continually to pay it forward. And really kind of talking about this right now, we've been speaking a lot about this at home, and we were talking about a story where she had a student one time that wasn't able to had enough money to finish tuition. And one day my aunt came home and said she saw some big shoes in this guest room and didn't know what was going on. And she let a student live with her for an entire semester to just make sure that they were still able to get their education. Or, you know, sending another student back home that did a little work and said, I don't think I'll be able to make it to go home to see my family, and called them back over and just put some money in their hand and said, now you go back home and you take care of your family. Those were just the kind of things that she did, and didn't learn all these things until she passed away, you know, because people now start telling these stories of what she did to them in their lives. And it's just been a blessing to hear little tidbits along the way, that she always made everybody feel special and what she did for the other individuals, and how they wanted to share those stories of who she was and how she shaped and embarked in their lives. So definitely. Thank you for sharing that, Drina. You're on mute.
Sorry. And she also, Adrina also ended by saying, and I've never seen her without having a sharp hat on.
Yes.
Is that it?
Yes. Like the Hazel Jackson tip is a real thing. Like it is, it is a very serious thing. She's gonna come in with. I always laughed until she wore her high heels way into her 80s, you know, and her clothes and her hats, and she stayed sharp. So her style was definitely something to talk about, and so I love that about her, just in general.
I think that's a great place to end it. It's like just a happy, positive, you know, just thinking about her in a great space. Kim, I'll pass it to you really quickly if you want to have any closing words. Amber, and you also, if you have anything that you would like to say before we close, please, by all means.
Amber, I just wanted to say it's been a pleasure to share this space with you. I'm honored to have known your grandmother. I feel teary-eyed just thinking about, you know, all of the things that I've heard, stories that I didn't know about her. And if it wasn't for her, I understand that I wouldn't have been able to become an educator in the School District of Lancaster. I mean, she opened the door and paved the way for me. And so I'm just truly deeply honored. And after this, I want to hear so much more about her. The connections that I have with her, the stories that I've heard from my brother-in-law, from my husband, and the stories that I've heard from others and around. Just thank you. She's a share of mine as well. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just take the time to, first of all, thank NAACP. Thank you, Kim, Johanna, Blanding, TPC, for allowing us to have this space to talk about Sheroes and to talk about my grandmother. I think we know that Black women and women of color have helped to shape and been big fighters here when it comes to our history, when it comes to making sure that we're educated well, when it makes sure that making sure that policy and politics are moved. And I thank you all for this space and time to share a little bit about who she was, what her legacy has been, and what it continues to be. You know, to know that somebody's been gone for this amount of time, and the local community still shows so much reverence to her is a true blessing and an honor. And I am grateful and thank you all for this opportunity in the community, and the possibility of hand and seeing, what may happen, and we've had a great showing from a petition and so many other things of people. So I just thank you all for this time in this space, and to enlighten the shero that has really helped to shape education, which shapes the minds of our future. So thank you all very much.
And on behalf of the NAACP, I do thank you, Kim. I thank you, Amber, so much for this amazing story. It was something that really enriched me to hear it. As the education chair, I know that these issues are not gone and that we have to still diligently fight day in and day out to ensure that we provide the kind of, what you said, the quality education, no matter what the zip code is. Many gracious thanks to TCP for broadcasting us along social media platforms. And please, again, do join us for our next event on February 23rd. I am 400, looking at the art of Jerome and Jeremiah Davis. I also like to say that next month is Women's History Month. So that's this would be a good opportunity, Amber, for us to start bringing in some more of those
Definitely.
Black women activists and highlight them in another Sheroes event. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. And please have a great afternoon.
Thank you.